Are you sitting on your daily commute thinking longingly about your next holiday? Are you filled with so much wanderlust that you've got no idea where to go next? Or have you got your next trip booked and in the bag and you're looking for tips and tricks to make it all go smoothly? Then, welcome to the TRAVELUST Podcast. Join me, Sam Sparrow, every fortnight as I chat to the people who've built their life around a desire to experience the world. As a travel blogger and wannabe professional city breaker, I'm nosy, and we get deep into travel memories, favourite destinations, and tips to make your next trip go with a bang. On this episode, it's a complete honour to be chatting to Beverley Reinemann from the award-winning travel blog Pack Your Passport. Beverley has been a massive name in the UK travel blogging scene for many years, and in this episode we chat all about how she got started and where her first travel adventures led her. From caravan parks in the UK to living and working in Australia for 2 years, we also talk about Beverley's favourite city break destinations. I get all the details on how to get an Australian working holiday visa and how she was thrust unexpectedly into solo travel. I'm constantly inspired by Beverley's adventures, and I know that you will be too. Remember to tweet me at Sam R. Sparrow with the hashtag TheTravelUst with your favourite travel tips and memories and your perspective on what we discuss. You can find even more travel content on my website asthesparrowflies.com along with all of the podcast episodes. Are you packed? Then let's go. So I am really excited today because on the podcast, we've got someone whose blog I have been reading for a very long time before I decided to start travel blogging and talking about travel, and whose tips I've used for a really long time. And not only that, she was the person that I had my first stranger date holiday with. So welcome to the podcast, Beverley Reinemann.
Hi.
Did I say your last name right?
Yes.
Yay.
Yay.
Good, because I suddenly realised, I didn't check that with you, but I do think that is how you pronounce it.
Definitely is.
So that's
Reinemann, yeah.
Reinemann, good, strong name.
Strong
I love it.
German name.
Yes, I love it. So for those people, I don't think there are going to be very many people listening to the podcast that don't know a little bit about you, which sounds a little bit more creepy than I was intending. But for those people that don't know who you are, please do introduce yourself.
I'm Beverley. I live in Leeds, and I run an award-winning travel blog called Pack Your Passport. It's all about solo travel and city breaks. And I'm also a freelance social media manager and copywriter. I started freelancing about 12 months ago, and so far it seems to be going okay.
I think it's going more than okay. And I definitely want to talk to you a little bit later in the conversation about how you kind of juggle being a freelancer with traveling, because I think that's quite interesting, because I've talked quite a lot in some of my other conversations about booking annual leave from your annual leave allowance. But obviously as a freelancer, it's quite different to manage. So hopefully we'll get on to that. But before we talk about your travel lifestyle now, I'm really interested in how you came to be into travel, and maybe a little bit about what your earliest travel memory was.
My earliest travel memory, I think, is being in a caravan on the south coast of England. So my family and I, so mum, dad, me and my younger sister, we used to go and stay in one of those static caravans on a caravan park, usually in Dorset, Devon, somewhere like that. And a lot of our time would be spent, on the beach or going to theme parks, that kind of thing. We never went abroad as a family ever. And it wasn't till I was 14, 15 that I got my first passport and actually went to Paris to go to Disneyland with my friend's family. So my parents stayed at home and I just kind of went away with them. So yeah, we used to just go to the south coast of England and stay in one of those caravans. And then a bit later on, when I was about 12, 13, my parents got their own caravan, one of the ones that you tow behind your car. And that's when we started exploring a little bit more. So we used to go to caravan parks just outside of places like York or Salisbury, or we used to go to Wales quite a lot as well. So we would just pack up at the weekend and just kind of go. Mum would find a deal and we'd just kind of all scramble in the car and go, really. So it was kind of a mix of like beachy holidays for like a week or two at a time, and kind of city breaks, I guess, which is, I suppose, where my love of city breaks comes from a little bit.
That's so interesting because quite a lot of people I've spoken to haven't had an early travel history the same as me, but your travel history is pretty much identical to my early travel history. Static caravans, I still think they're the absolute best.
They're
in fact, I'm
brilliant.
going to stay in one in May. I love them. It's just exciting. It's like a whole house lifted up above the ground. It's the most exciting thing ever.
They're brilliant. And you know what? When we got our tourer caravan as well, I was completely against it. 12, 13-year-old me was like, no, I just want to go abroad. Why can't we go to Spain like all of my other friends? My parents just had no desire to take us abroad. And I really didn't like that at the time. I remember thinking that I wanted to be like my friends and go to all these kind of far-flung places that my friends were going to. But actually looking back, and at the time actually, we actually had such a good time. And it was kind of a bit of an adventure going off in the caravan and getting there and putting the awning up and kind of getting set up. And it was actually quite exciting, and so many good travel memories from staying in that caravan and just kind of rocking up wherever and kind of like see where it takes us, really.
You're literally the only person that is my age that has used the word awning. In a conversation. I am so excited. No, if I say awning to anyone else, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
What is that? Yeah. Like putting the awning up and like filling up all of the water bottles and the gas canisters, and 100%.
Amazing. I'm so into this. I'm going to stay on a caravan park for the early May bank holiday in Lincolnshire. And Mr. Sparrow is not okay with it.
Oh no!
But we're going to go, and it's quite a nice caravan park. It's not quite as rough and ready as some of the ones that I've stayed in before.
Yeah, this is the thing. This is the thing. So we would go to caravan club sites. So my parents were caravan club members. Yeah, we would go to caravan club sites because they're, I would say, a little bit nicer. They're not the rough and ready type ones where there's no showers or anything. They were actually really nice ones. There were showers and often entertainment blocks and swimming pools and things like that. So even though we never went abroad, we actually still had such a good time. And I actually made loads of friends when we used to go on holiday because you're in such close quarters with other people staying in their caravans as well. I made quite a few friends that way as well, which was nice as a teenager.
Yeah, I love that. I used to always make friends, and then we become pen friends. Like, I wonder whether kids now do pen friends or whether they do email. I'd be quite sad if pen friends, like when you're a kid, isn't a thing anymore.
I agree.
That was a big part of every summer.
I think maybe they just add each other on Facebook or Instagram, maybe. I'm not sure. But we would become pen friends, like actually writing letters to each other. And also we'd give each other our home phone numbers because mobiles weren't a thing then. So you'd be calling this complete stranger's house and asking to speak to somebody that you'd literally just met on holiday on the South Coast in Dorset. But yeah, I think I'm showing my age now.
No. It's so funny. As an aside, nothing to do with travel, the concept of like in our early teenage years that phoning the home phone was a thing. Just if you told a teenager now that that's what you did, that would be so weird. You'd phone the home phone. You'd have no idea if they were in. But then thinking about it, like at age 13 or 14, where else were they going to be?
Exactly.
Of course they were going to be at home.
Exactly.
So funny. So you spent a lot of time going around the UK, being in a caravan, which I absolutely love. How did, I guess, the big move into making travel part of your life happen? What led you to that?
So I just finished it. Well, I'd finished uni. I did media and marketing at Leeds Uni, and I moved back to my hometown, which is where my boyfriend at the time lived as well. And I got a job. I was working in advertising sales, which I didn't love, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And my boyfriend at the time, one of his work colleagues had got a working holiday for Australia. And she'd gone out there and she was working out there and also traveling quite a bit as well. And I remember going home one night after work, I'd driven home and I got a phone call from him. And he said, look, Emma's gone and got this working holiday visa for Australia. She's working, she's having an amazing time. She's found a job. She's also traveling quite a lot. How about you and I go and do something like that? And I was like, Absolutely not. No way. I've got a job, I've got a car, I've got friends here. It's my hometown. I'm living with my parents and I'd like to, maybe get a house together or something. I was completely against the idea and we had such a massive argument about it. Went to bed on the argument, didn't speak for a couple of days. And then I called him up a couple of days later and said, look, I've had a bit of a think about it. And yeah, I think we should do it. And so that was, I think, winter 2009. And by June 2010, we were living in Australia. So we had 6 months to save. I was living at my parents' at the time. So that was, massive privilege to be able to do that. Live with them to kind of save money on rent and just try to save up as much as possible. Got our visas and one-way flight to Australia. And that's the first time I'd ever been on a plane as well, which was quite a big deal for me because I'd gone to Paris Disneyland when I was about 14 with one of my friends' parents and my friends. And that was obviously on the Channel Tunnel. So first time on a plane was to Sydney, which was quite a massive deal at the time.
That's insane. Actually, interestingly, I did go on a plane when I was quite young because I think we went to Portugal, but I don't remember. And my first memory of going on a plane was also going to Sydney.
Really?
Yeah. So I went to Australia when I was about 11, almost 12, because my uncle lived in Australia. So my nan and granddad wanted to go out and visit him and took me over the Christmas period. So that was my first kind of memorable trip. I definitely had been on a plane before. I have got no memory of it whatsoever. So that's quite, that's a big step to take. How were you feeling about, how were you feeling when you're on the plane, or even as you were you obviously had 6 months to save and I guess to get used to the idea, but that's an incredibly brave thing to do, given that you'd never really traveled abroad before.
Yeah, I was so nervous about the flight. I think because I had no idea what to expect. I just had no frame of reference at all. I'd never been on a plane, never really traveled. I literally no idea what to expect. I think what made it better was the fact that I wasn't going alone. I was going with my boyfriend at the time and he had flown a lot. He'd been to America a bunch of times. He used to go to Spain with his family quite a lot as a child. So he was quite used to that. And I think because he was completely comfortable with it, I thought, well, it can't be that bad. I'm sure it's fine. And actually, I don't know if it's because that was 8 years ago now, but I don't really remember a lot of it. I think either I completely blocked it out or I just slept a lot. I can't remember. I remember sleeping quite a lot. I remember there being quite a lot of turbulence after we left Bangkok, because we transferred in Bangkok. And I remember being in floods of tears because I was so scared, because it felt to me like the plane was falling out of the sky, and that's obviously not the case. And now I'm much more comfortable with flying. But to have your first flight to Sydney was quite a big deal.
So what happened? So obviously the plan was you had a working visa for Sydney, for Australia. And am I right that they are normally a year?
Yeah, so you basically get 12 months. You can apply any time between the ages of 18 and 30. And I was 24 at the time when I applied. So yeah, you basically have a year-long visa. And on that visa, you are able to get a job, and also travel around as well for a year. You're not allowed to work for the same company for more than 6 months at a time, which I guess encourages people to travel around to do the travel and work part of the visa. So we rocked up in Sydney. We landed extremely early in the morning. But it was the most amazing feeling walking out of Sydney Airport, and the sun was just coming up and the sky was a bit pink. And having never been on a flight before, I just had this overwhelming feeling of possibility.
Yeah.
I just thought, oh my God, I can go anywhere now. This is amazing. I've done this. I've come this far. I can basically go anywhere now. This is amazing. So we both found jobs at the same company. It was an events company, and we worked there for about 4 or 5 months, I want to say. And we did quite a bit of travelling as well. And we also moved to Melbourne while we were there, and we worked in Melbourne. I worked in Melbourne as a barista in a coffee shop. And we hopped about a bit. We lived in a camper van for a little while we did the East Coast road trip that we wanted to do. And then to get our second year visa, we did the 90-day like rural work that you have to do, like regional work. And a lot of people they go and work on like a mango farm, or go and pick apples or pears, or go and pack fruit somewhere. And you can do it basically anywhere. It has to be in a certain postcode in order for you to apply for this second year visa. But we actually landed on our feet because a girl that I'd gone to uni with, her family knew a family who lived out there and owned a winery. So we contacted them and said, look, we'd love to get our second year visa. Can we come and work on your winery? And they said yes. So it was just outside of Melbourne, just outside of Bendigo, actually. And we worked on the winery for 3 months. And we got our second year visa, which was great.
That's amazing. And also to work on a winery I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really, really hard work. Early mornings. Often the weather was horrible. I mean, often the weather was lovely as well. We were living in this kind of dilapidated caravan that I think was from the 60s, which was riddled with kind of like huntsman spiders and everything you can imagine, really, which was definitely an eye-opener.
That's not for me. That's not for me.
It wasn't for me either. It was definitely, it got me out of my comfort zone a lot. It was very hard work. But sometimes you'd be working in, the top winery on top of a hill, and you'd look over, and especially in the early mornings, you'd see kangaroos in the fields, which was just incredible. And the family that we were staying with was so lovely as well. I've heard kind of horror stories from other backpackers about, working on, fruit farms and packing fruit and things like that, where you're all just kind of like bust in and bust out and staying in dorms. But actually we cooked dinner with the family every night, and we went up to their home and, enjoyed dinner with them every night and had a few glasses of wine, as you do when you work on a winery. And it was really hard. And at times I did not want to do it at all. But it was so worth it just to get that extra year in Australia.
So what happened? So you did your 3 months, and then where did you go next for your kind of second year?
We went back to Melbourne, and we got a little flat in St Kilda, which is kind of like a backpacking area of the city. And we started working in an office again, and we just did odd jobs here and there, really. And then we moved back to Sydney for a little bit and went back to that company that we were working for when we first moved to Sydney. And we got another flat with a few other people. And then we thought, look, we haven't got much time left. We need to go and see the things that we wanted to see, because we'd been working quite hard. We'd saved money to go out there, and we actually hadn't touched a lot of our savings, which was great because we'd been working so hard. And we thought, we need to go and see some of Australia. We've seen quite a lot of it. We'd been to Surfers Paradise, we'd been to Byron Bay. We'd obviously been all around Sydney and Melbourne. And we'd done a Great Ocean Road trip as well, which was incredible to see the 12 Apostles and everything. But that's when we thought, let's get a camper van and do an East Coast road trip from Sydney up to Cape Tribulation and then back down to Cairns. So we did that. The last few months of being in Australia was spent living in this camper van that we got. And it was honestly one of the best things I've ever done. I mean, it was tiny. It was not that comfortable to sleep in, to be honest. I could barely reach the pedals. So when I was driving, it was a bit, not sure. But it was an amazing experience to just kind of rock up to a campsite, get set up, make ourselves a cup of tea and get the chairs out and just sit there and have a beer and chat to other people. It was incredible.
I have to say, so I've been to Australia once, but that was when I was very little, and I've never made it back to see the family I have out there. But I think, it's really interesting that you've had such a varied experience in Australia. I mean, Australia is obviously huge, so all the different areas of Australia are obviously often very different. But the fact that you've worked, you lived in cities, you worked on the winery, and then you were in a caravan. You've kind of done almost all different types of travel, kind of wrapped up in that trip in one country.
Definitely. It was almost like kind of being an expat, because at some points we were working full time and we'd rented a flat together, and then sometimes it kind of felt as though we were backpacking, and I think we got the best of both worlds that way. I mean, we met a bunch of people who was like I'm still friends with. We definitely had the best of both worlds, and we tried to make it so that we weren't working too hard. We actually got to travel a bit as well, and that's what the working holiday visa is for. It's so that you can earn money in the country you're traveling in.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing, and I guess I mean, I'm well over and above the age to partake in that, but certainly for those listening that are younger and umming and ahhing about whether they should do it, I think you've given a great advertisement for kind of the opportunities
and because you can only get that visa until you're 30, it's kind of like I always tell people, if you're considering doing it, go and do it, because you're never going to say, oh, I wish I hadn't moved to Australia on a working holiday visa. What a silly idea. That's never going to happen unless you have an absolutely horrendous experience. It's one of those things that I think just go and do it if you can, obviously. I mean, I came from the privileged position of the fact that I could live at my parents' and save a bunch of money on rent so that I could afford to go. But if you can, then I would definitely say go. It's such an amazing experience.
And I know that you've got some tips about getting your working holiday visa. So I'm going to link them. They're on your blog. So I'm going to link them in the show notes so that if you are considering it, Beverley is your woman with all the advice and tips. There's a lot of Australia content on your site. And I guess really Australia was where travel blogging started for you, because you started your blog whilst you were in Australia.
Yeah, I did. So I started the blog in 2011, which was when I was living in Melbourne, and I was working in a cafe at the time. And my boyfriend at the time was working full time. So I would finish at maybe like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, having, been up since 5 o'clock in the morning. And I would go to this internet cafe just off Flinders Street in Melbourne. And it was this dingy kind of cafe, but it was also a bar as well. So you go down to this basement, and I'd always get like a drink or something, or a hot chocolate, whatever, sit in their internet cafe and do travel research. And I happened upon a few blogs, and I can't remember what those blogs are now, but I looked at those blogs and I thought, I could do that. I've always loved writing, always. And I thought, I love traveling, I love writing. Why not put those two together and start a travel blog? And so I actually started my travel blog not even on my own laptop. I started it on a public computer in an internet cafe.
That is, it's an incredible story, because I think it's interesting to know what has driven the passion, whether it's the travel blog kind of has driven the further passion again and again and again to travel, or that first experience in Australia, stepping out on that plane and going, I can literally do anything now. But that kind of culmination in those two things have led you to now being an award-winning travel blogger, which is very exciting, and also my friend, which I think is possibly more exciting. Yeah. I think it's more exciting, depending on your viewpoint. So you obviously came home from Australia, and I think, you mentioned at the beginning of the show that you enjoy city breaks and that you write quite a lot about solo travel. So what is your ideal way to travel now? So you did the expat, 2 years, backpacker, caravan style thing in Australia. And now I think it's fair to say you'll be better known for traveling to cities and kind of really making the most of that more urban travel lifestyle. Where did that come from? Where did that love of cities come from?
After Australia, I actually went to New Zealand for a year on another working holiday visa. And it was when I first moved to Auckland in New Zealand that I became, I guess, a solo traveller. My boyfriend at the time broke up with me, and I was living in a hostel in Ponsonby, which is a suburb just outside of Auckland, and kind of didn't know what I was going to do with my life, to be honest. I'd been blogging for about 6 months to a year, and I didn't really know what to do. I was considering going home because I was out there alone now, and I didn't know anybody really. And then just through being at the hostel, I met a bunch of friends who we're still friends now. And we ended up all living together in different flats and traveling around New Zealand together and going on city breaks to places like Wellington and Queenstown. And I never ever thought that I could travel on my own. I thought it's just not something I can do. Even though I've been brought up to be quite independent and I have no trouble going to do stuff on my own, the travel aspect of it just scared me. I just no idea what to expect. I'd always been used to traveling with someone else, and especially having spent the last 2 years before that traveling with someone, living with someone, to suddenly have to be on your own and make those decisions on your own was quite scary. But I had the best time in New Zealand, and it was the place where I kind of had to learn to be by myself again. And that kind of led me to going on more city breaks when I eventually moved back to England in 2013, because I then moved to London. And London is just so well connected in terms of getting to Europe and getting around the UK. And so that's when I started going on city breaks. And my first city break on my own, my first solo city break, was Amsterdam.
Oh, Amsterdam.
Oh,
I love Amsterdam, the love that is in my soul for Amsterdam, and indeed quite a lot of other people. Amsterdam seems to be that sort of city that once you go, it really grabs you. I haven't met anyone that's been to Amsterdam that isn't immediately planning to go back.
I agree. And I think I have met people who weren't overly keen on Amsterdam, it's because they went on a stag do or a hen do and just spent the entire time drinking. And there's no problem with that at all, obviously. But Amsterdam has so much more to give in terms of culture and food and sightseeing. And it's just a beautiful city. It really is. And whenever I go, I kind of feel at home. It's a bit weird because I've obviously never lived there, but I think it's something to do with the fact that it was my first ever solo city break that I went on. And I only really chose it because I found cheap flights from Stansted, and I was living in East London at the time. So I thought that's pretty easy. I'll just get to Stansted. I'll go away for the weekend. And I was terrified. I had never really done anything like that before. But it kind of set the tone for the rest of my travels since then, to be honest.
Yeah, I think as you're aware, and I think if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll be aware. I did my first solo city break at the grand old age of 34 last year.
It's never too late, though, is it? It's never too late to go away on your own.
Too late. And I think kind of your experiences, so going away with you and having been a long time reader of your blog, was the thing that I think ultimately really pushed me to giving it a go. And I didn't know how I would find it. I am very comfortable in my own skin, and I'm very comfortable in my own company. And I'm alone quite a lot anyway, but it just feels that little bit extra to be in a different city and to do all of the things that you need to do when you go away entirely on your own, when you've never done that before. And I think the older you get, the more the fear factor sets in.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can be as independent as you like at home and feel fine with going for dinner on your own, or maybe going for coffee, commuting on your own. All of these things are things that we do alone all the time at home. But then replicating that in another city that you've never been to is scary. It's a massive jump out of your comfort zone. And I think especially if you don't speak the language, or perhaps the travel system isn't easy to understand, that can be really intimidating. I mean, in Amsterdam, it's a walkable city. It's beautiful to walk around. It's not difficult to speak to people, and the public transport is super, super easy. And so when people ask me, where should I go on my first solo city break, I kind of always recommend Amsterdam because it's so easy. I mean, I think it's easy, but maybe that's because I've been a
No,
few
I agree with
times.
you. No, but I know when I went with you and Sophie, I was, you guys had already been before, but even so, the system, once we realized we had to tap in and tap out with our cards on the tram, it was really, really easy. And I think I feel that the same way about Barcelona. And obviously that was the first place that I traveled solo, but I'd already been there quite a lot with different friends and with Mrs. Sparrow in the past. But Barcelona is also another place that is really walkable in terms of the main city. The public transport is absolutely phenomenal and dirt cheap. And I think because tourism is so big there, even if you don't speaking Spanish is not always that helpful in Barcelona because actually they speak Catalan and it is different. But even if you don't speak the language, actually the vast majority, I didn't come across anyone when I was there before Christmas, and I did go to some out of the way places that I couldn't communicate with somehow. And so I think for me, like I think most European cities actually are really good shouts for a first solo trip because it's a city, it feels familiar. If you come from a city in the UK, I think a lot of them work the same.
They do. And I feel as though once you've been to one city, it's quite easy to replicate that experience in other cities. You just get more and more comfortable with it. I mean, now it seems ridiculous that I would ever think that I couldn't travel anywhere on my own because I'm just so independent now. And so used to relying on myself, and I can pretty much just get through life fine on my own. But back then, when I first found myself, alone in Auckland with no friends, I was like, how am I ever going to see the world alone? I'm basically just going to go home after this year and not see anything ever again. And that felt really disappointing because by then, having been in Australia for a couple of years, I really had caught the travel bug. And I couldn't imagine not seeing the rest of the world.
And so how soon was it after you came back from New Zealand that you were like, right, I'm getting back on the horse, so to speak, and getting myself out there?
Well, I came back in October 2013 and lived with my parents for a bit, again, just for a couple of months. Moved down to London in December 2013. And then I actually went away to Poland with a friend in March the following year, March 2014. And that wasn't a solo break, obviously, because I went with a friend. But it was my first European break since going to Paris, age 14. So it's quite a long time in between those two. And then I think I came back and I just used to look at Skyscanner and just see what was, which I'm sure other people have told you as well. I just used to go on Skyscanner and put in Stansted or Heathrow or Gatwick and just see what was cheap and see where I wanted to go. And a flight came up in July 2014 to go to Amsterdam. And I thought, well, my birth is in July. I will go and spend my 29th in Amsterdam. So that's what I did.
Oh, that's just the best. And as a disclaimer, I've had quite a lot of people, particularly after listening to the episode that I did with Sophie, saying, I can't get off Skyscanner now. It's a disease. So I cannot be held responsible for you developing a Skyscanner habit, but I have a habit. I have a Skyscanner and a Holiday Pirates habit. And they are two tabs that are always open on my laptop.
What I love about Skyscanner, though, is that you can put in your the airport that you want to depart from. So with me now, because I've obviously moved back to Leeds, I always put Leeds or Manchester because they're just the two easiest for me to get to. And then I just click everywhere and just see what's available.
So by the time this episode goes out, I would have been to Gdansk, but that is how I ended up going to Gdansk. I was sitting in the bath just before New Year's, and I was like, let's just see what's cheap, in the sales. And I was like, oh, $9.99 each way to Gdansk. All right.
Do you know what?
And
I think that's exactly what my friend and I did when we went to Gdansk. It was such a cheap flight. And I think because we went in March as well, it was such a cheap flight. And when we got there, our hotel was, I think it was like £12.50 a night each. It was ridiculously cheap. And then we went out to a few bars and obviously had vodka. And the vodka was just dirt cheap. It was brilliant. I genuinely don't think I spent over £150 on the entire thing.
No, Poland, do you know what? Because I've been to Krakow, and then obviously I would have, but at the moment when we record this, I'm planning my Gdansk trip. And I bloody love Poland. I think it's amazing. And it is another one of those places that has got that kind of a bit of a Brits abroad stag do reputation because it's cheap. But Poland has so much to offer, particularly, number one, all of the World War II history is just incredible. Number two, the architecture, I think, is absolutely amazing.
Is why I wanted to go. It was just so interesting and so different to anything I'd seen before. I mean, obviously, I come from a really small town in Lincolnshire. It's a little bit cobbly and oldie worldy. And then having moved to Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland, London, going to Poland, it was just completely different to anything I'd ever seen before.
Yeah, I always recommend, if you're looking for a budget break, I always 100%. Recommend Poland. Also, pierogies are in Poland.
Oh, they're so good. It's worth going to Poland just for pierogi and vodka.
Yeah, I mean, pierogi and vodka, I mean, that is what I lived on in Krakow. We ordered pierogies. So this is something about things being lost in translation. We thought we'd ordered a starter portion of pierogies. And then we had schnitzel for main course when we were in Krakow, because it's so cheap to eat in Poland. Like, it would be rude not to have 3 courses. And we had the biggest plate each of pierogies turned up, and I was like, oh shit, because we couldn't get the sense of prices, because Polish zloty, it's just all numbers to me. I hadn't really done the conversion in my head. And then this schnitzel turned up that was twice the size of a normal dinner plate. It was insane. And the thing is, I was like saying to Andrew, I was like, we have to make the effort on this, because I don't want them to know that we were just too dumbass to understand the menu. So we were like shoving this food, and like we rolled ourselves out of there. It was absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, like, you will eat well in Poland. You will absolutely drink well in Poland. And like, the architecture is great. I found the people are super friendly.
Yeah, they're lovely.
Actually, what's hilarious, I don't know if this happened to you in Gdansk, but when we went to Krakow, so we went to Krakow first and then got the train to Prague. And it was really interesting because in Prague, the vibe is a lot colder from the locals,
really?
definitely.
I've never been to Prague.
Yeah, they're not known to be as friendly, I would say. But the minute anyone in Poland knew that we were British and from London, they would give me the name of like their second cousin 3 times removed and ask if I knew them. It's so funny. And there's a serious lot of love for the Brits out in Poland, actually. And we had really lovely conversations with people out there. So I would 10 out of 10 recommend Poland.
Yeah, me too. And for a city break, I would also recommend Berlin.
Oh God, yeah, Berlin. Oh, absolutely incredible. I love Berlin.
Yeah, I went for my birthday.
That's a city I would go back to.
Me too. I absolutely love it.
Was that the first time you'd been to Berlin when you went last year?
Yeah, first time in Germany, actually, which is a bit ridiculous, seeing as my dad's side of the family is German. But I went with one of my friends last year for my birthday, and it was brilliant. I'd love to go back. I feel as though I only had 4 days there, and I really feel as though I'd like to go and spend a lot more time in Berlin or just in Germany, to be honest.
Yeah, I've just booked to go to Munich because I spent quite a lot of time in Germany, kind of as a mid to late teen, because I studied German language up to quite a high level. Literally can't speak a bloody word of it now, but I actually can. When I went to Berlin a couple of years ago, I realised that I remembered
You
more than
do.
I
I
than
can
I
get
thought I did.
by. And I did actually have a chat with this guy in H&M of all places in Berlin.
I'm not very good kind of spoken, but I signs and menus, like reading
Yeah,
comprehension, I can
it's
remember
much easier when
like
you just like
from
look at a menu. Yeah, I know what that is, or a sign. I know what that is. But it's when someone's talking to you and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't know what they're saying.
And the German language is really weird, unlike kind of French and Spanish and all of that, in terms of how sentences are constructed. So it's always really hard to remember how you're supposed to say something. But I love Germany as a whole, actually. And I think it's one of those places that is surprisingly cheap to travel around in. It's not too expensive. Although I have found, because I've been booking Munich as a city, to fly there and also the hotels are miles more expensive than Berlin,
Oh,
actually.
really?
Yeah, really much more expensive as a city, I think. It remains to be seen how expensive it will be once we're out there. But Munich is, I think, going to be so different to Berlin, because obviously Berlin is very urban and grey, and because a lot of it has been
Yeah.
reconstructed. Whereas Munich still has a lot of the really old buildings and architecture to it. And we're going to spend a day going to Nuremberg, which is relatively close by. And that still has quite a well restored medieval town centre. So I think what's great about Germany, obviously it's such a big country, you can get the best of both worlds, like, or not even just both worlds, all worlds like are represented within
You're going to
Germany, I
have
think.
the best time in Munich.
I'm so excited. Bavarian beer halls
Oh, yeah,
come at me
100%.
is
Yeah.
basically where I'm at.
You're just going to be drunk the entire time.
So city breaks are your thing and solo travel is your thing. And you've already given a lot of great insight as to what it's like to travel solo. But I wanted to ask you, one of the things I think if anyone's been following you on Instagram or indeed reading your blog, I think it'd be fair to say they'd get the idea that you're really quite into street art. And I wanted to ask kind of whether you have any tips, because I think photographing street art has become quite a thing now for people. And I love to go and find local street art. But you seem to have a knack of finding really good street art to take photos of and to see and to look whenever you go somewhere. Are you just attracted to it? Like it's like a magnet.
Pulls me in.
Yeah, and you're just or do you notice it more because you're looking for it, or do you specifically research where to go before you head to a city to find decent
You know
street
what? I
art?
think it might be a combination of those. But I think I probably look out for it more than perhaps other people do, because I used to live at the top of Brick Lane in London. And those that know that area of London around Brick Lane and around Bethnal Green and Hackney and Shoreditch will know that it's just, there's so much street art there and it's always changing. And because I lived in that area of London for 3 years, I kind of got to see a lot of pieces come and go, and a lot of pieces stay as well, and they'll probably be there for years to come. But I got to see a lot of pieces go up and a lot of pieces come down, and I'd never really had an interest in it, and I'm certainly not creative in that way myself. But I think probably because of that, I tend to look out for it a bit more. And even on my first trip to Amsterdam, I saw some street art there and I took a few photos. And then recently last year, I went to Birmingham, and there's a part of Birmingham called Digbeth, which is quite famous for street art as well. And every time I've been across to Manchester, and I went back again a few weeks ago in January, I went over to the Northern Quarter because, again, that's really famous for street art, and you can see some amazing pieces there. And I think I just look out for it a bit more because I think I think it just looks really nice, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think it's such a talent to be able to create something like that. I have a friend at home, actually in my hometown, who is a street artist, and he's just actually had a piece go up in Manchester. And having watched him work and kind of like seen like behind the scenes and how he does it, I just think it's amazing. It's not something that I don't look at it when I'm not traveling. I don't really research it. But I do like to find it when I travel, because most of my travel photos are of buildings. I used to be quite a beachy person. When I was in Australia, I was very much like, just love going to the beach. I love taking photos of the beach. But actually, since I moved back to the UK and I've been on quite a few city breaks, it's just been more about the architecture for me. And I guess with that comes taking photos of street art as well.
Yeah, I think, and I think Beverley's doing herself a slight disservice here, because your photography of street art, you've got a way of, I mean, your photography full stop is phenomenal. So you should absolutely go and follow Beverley on Instagram, and all of those links will be in the show notes. But I'm also going to link that you've got a couple of amazing posts around street art in Birmingham and Berlin, I think. So I'll link them in the show notes, because interestingly, when you went to Berlin, it wasn't that long after I'd gone, in the grand scheme of things. And there were I think like when I went, it was so cold and it was snowing and I could barely lift my eyes from the floor. So I wasn't necessarily, and it was very dark. Like,
it's not really the best conditions for looking at street art, is it?
No. So obviously we went to the East Side Gallery, where, you know, you've got an incredible array of quite professional street art there. But when I saw your photography of all the street art in Berlin, I was like, well, now I immediately need to go back, because I've clearly missed it here. And actually, I think just through being more aware of your trips with street art, it's made me very aware. So like, I was in Manchester, I think a couple of weeks before you, and I spent quite a lot of time dragging Andrew around the Northern Quarter, getting photos of all the street art and things like that. Because like I said, I think it tells a really interesting story of a place as well as being really eye-catching to look at, and you can get some good photos.
It does, and especially in Berlin, obviously a lot of the street art is quite political, and I really love that side of it. I love the fact that it can tell a story of a city, and I love that there's always a meaning behind something. Like in Manchester, there's a huge mural of bees, and obviously that's the Manchester worker bee, and it kind of ties itself to the city, and I think that's really nice. We haven't got a lot of street art in Leeds. We just had a huge piece go up on the side of a building near the train station, which is amazing, but there's not a huge amount around the city, and I'm hoping that changes in the next few years, because I just think it brings just so much to a city.
Yeah, I agree. I think, well, obviously, I mean, I don't live right in the centre of London, but I'm in the centre of London quite a lot, and I always enjoy seeing new pieces. And you're right, Shoreditch and the kind of East London is a real hotbed for it. So it's really exciting. So it's clear that you've got a lot of love for European city breaks, but I would like to know whether there are any destinations that you have been to that, not like your worst destination, but perhaps that didn't live up to your expectations or you found slightly disappointing.
Yeah, I guess when I went to Brisbane, and I hate saying this, I hate not liking somewhere, but when I went to Brisbane, it was with a view to actually move there, because we'd lived in Sydney for a while, we'd lived in Melbourne for a while, and we thought maybe we should move to Brisbane for a little bit. And never been there before, but then we'd never been to Melbourne before, and we lived there. So we just thought, why not? Let's just go. So packed up our stuff in our suitcase and went, and we stayed in a hostel for a little bit. And we were meant to go to job interviews, and we kind of spent maybe like a week or two applying for jobs and not really getting anywhere. And we'd obviously spent that couple of weeks exploring as well. And there was nothing wrong with Brisbane at all, but it just didn't give me the same feeling as Sydney and Melbourne. Sydney is it's very glitzy. You know, you go to Circular Quay and you've got the Sydney Opera House, and you've got the Harbour Bridge, and you've got the harbour itself, which is just beautiful, and you've got all of the boats, and then the harbour beaches and the other beaches. It feels so cosmopolitan and just a great city to be in. Melbourne is like Sydney's cooler little sister. It's more about the street art and about coffee culture, and it's a bit more, I guess, hipster. I hate using that word, but I guess it is. And then we went to Brisbane, and I just didn't feel as though I could put it in one of those boxes. I didn't feel anything for it. We managed to get job interviews, and we were just getting ready to go to these interviews. We were all, dressed up nicely. And I said to my boyfriend at the time, I said, I don't want to go. I don't want to live here. And he went, neither do I, actually. And so we'd just been keeping it from each other because we wanted to make it work. But the next day for some reason, we decided not to fly back because it would be too expensive. We opted instead to get a 16-hour bus ride back to Sydney.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Horrendous. It was just like the worst bus ride of my life. It was awful. We arrived back in Sydney, and I was like, oh my God, get me a bed.
Oh man, I get motion sick quite easily. So a 16-hour bus ride is not the one for me.
It was not the best. It was not the best. And do you know what? I don't think we actually saved a lot of money. I think we were just being cheap, to be honest.
Yeah, but when we've all made those mistakes. I look back in some of my trips and some of my holidays and think, you do. I've never long-term traveled like that, but even on a basic holiday, you do worry about budget. No matter how big your budget is, you've still got a budget, and you do worry about budget. And so I think sometimes, especially if you're in the destination, you can make some really crazy decisions because of budget. And I think back to some of the things that we did or didn't do in some of the places that I've been to, and thought, just spend the extra 20 quid.
It's silly, isn't it?
Like, why did you do that? Yeah, and I just think, oh, that's really annoying. Like, there's a couple of examples. I loved Naples, but we made some decisions there, I think purely down to cash, because Rome had really rinsed our budget, and Naples was, we were running out of money. I mean, we weren't running out of money, but in this fictional budget I had in my head, we were running out of money. So we just made some really stupid decisions, which were just, I look back now and think, just spend the extra 20 quid, Sam.
I feel the same about hostels.
Oh, I mean, my only experience of being in a hostel is with you. And that room that we stayed in was so nice at the Generator in Amsterdam. But there have been times when I've maybe gone away on my own and thought, do you know what? I want to keep this really, really cheap. I've got cheap flights. I just want to stay somewhere really cheap. And I book a dorm room. I book a bed in a dorm room in a hostel. And at the time, I justify it to myself by telling myself that, it's super cheap. I'm barely going to be there because I'm going to be exploring quite a lot. I'm sure I'll be able to sleep. I'm sure it'll be fine. But then you get there and you put your bag on that bunk and you're just like, this was a mistake. This was a really big mistake. And you just, I don't know, you just feel as though, I mean, maybe it's because I'm older now, like I'm 32, but even a few years ago, I just thought, do you know what, I'm not doing hostels anymore. I'm just going to spend the extra money and get a private room in a hostel, or I'm going to get a hotel, because it's just not worth it laying there, not being able to sleep, or getting woken up by someone else going to the bathroom, or packing their stuff with like rustly carrier bags at 6 a.m. And the thing about city break is that you're on the go quite a lot and you're walking, miles and miles every day normally. When you get back to where you're sleeping, you want it to be calm. You want to, get a proper night's sleep. Well, I do anyway. And you can't do that in a hostel. No, I'm an advocate for spending like I've stayed if I think back to like where we stayed in Prague and Krakow, they were not like glitzy hotels. Like the more traditionally styled hotels tend to be cheaper. But I would rather stay as close into a city as I can. But if the room is a bit crap, I don't mind.
Same. when I went to,
but it needs to be my room.
yeah, 100%. When I went to Porto, the hotel that I got was quite cheap. And when I walked in, it was like walking into something from the 60s. I don't think it had actually been changed since the 60s. But you know what? It was clean. It had its own private bathroom and it was mine. And I honestly didn't care as long as I could come back, shut the door, and it just be me.
Yeah. So long as it's clean. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. If the opportunity comes, so here's an example of feast and famine for my travel that's happening, or has either happened when this goes out or is about to happen. I'm going to Marrakesh, but my mum is taking us for her birthday. So my mum has booked and paid for it as my birthday present. So she's paying for me. So she's fully in charge of the booking, which means it is out and out luxury because my mum does not, I struggle to go away on holiday with my mum, even though I love it, because I cannot reach her budget basically of nice hotel and flights. But so when we go to Marrakesh, the hotel is eye-watering. It's like nothing you've ever seen. And I'm going to make full use of the 3 nights
You
in
are
that
going to
hotel.
love it. Same with my parents. When my mum and dad came to visit me and my then boyfriend in Australia, we were living in Melbourne at the time. But we obviously wanted to show mum and dad Sydney, and they wanted to go and see my dad's auntie and uncle who live in the Blue Mountains. So we said, we'll come up to Sydney for 10 days. You decide where you want to stay. We don't mind. And we got there. We flew up to Sydney to see them. Mum and dad had already checked in. And we got there and they came out to meet us on Pitt Street, which is one of the big streets in Sydney. And it's where I actually used to work. And we ended up in front of this big apartment building. And I was like, I thought you were just going to book like a hotel or something. And she went, no. And we walked in and we went in the lift, and it felt like the lift was never going to stop. We just kept climbing higher and higher, walked out into this amazing 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony overlooking Sydney. It wasn't near the harbour. Like they didn't spend an inordinate amount of money, but it was just so nice. And I thought, I quite like travelling with my parents when this happens.
Yeah, I know, right? So because I travelled with my parents, like in my later teen years, this is how I ended up in the all-inclusive bucket, because that's how my mum travelled. And so I'd been on a couple of holidays with my parents. And so I was like, well, that's what travel is. That's what a holiday is.
I mean, to be fair, just to be completely clear, this was like a once in a lifetime thing for my parents. They would never have come to Australia if I hadn't been living out there at the time. It was just like a once in a lifetime, let's go and see Beverley while she's living out there. And they knew that it would just be like a one-time thing. And I think they thought, let's just make the most of it. Let's stay somewhere nice and just have a nice time. So yeah, but just to make it clear that it's definitely not the norm.
No, I mean, so because my parents are really young and I'm really old, so they have no responsibilities now. So literally all their disposable income, like at their age, their disposable income would normally be bringing up kids. Instead it's going on holiday, which is the best. And so if I can partake in that, I do. But on the flip side, a few weeks after that, I'm going to Gdansk and I'm staying in a single bedded room in a hotel, which is smaller than my thumb, for the grand cost of £39 for 2 nights. So
you are joking. £39 for 2 nights.
Yeah, £39 for 2 nights. So the hotel doesn't even look that bad. It's on the edge of the old town. It's a single bed, but that's fine. There's just one of me. I can deal with it. And I think you travel. So, and then when we go to Munich, because this is kind of, I guess, a sort of a celebration holiday for Andrew and I. We're staying in 2 different hotels when we're out there, and we're going to kind of upgrade our budget a bit and stay somewhere really nice. There's some really nice hotels in Munich, so we're going to do that. But then the next trip I go on, I'll especially if I travel more on my own, I will stay somewhere you know, I like quirky, but it doesn't need to be posh or luxury.
No, I'm the same. As long as it's clean, I don't mind. I feel like I sound like my mother when I say that, but as long as it's clean, it doesn't matter because you're not going to be there that much when you're on a city break. You're going to be out and about exploring, eating, that kind of thing. So,
I mean, I spent my New Year's Eve this year in a travel lodge. I'm not fussy.
no, me either. I spent my New Year on my sofa in Leeds eating pasta and drinking water because I was really sick. So I think you probably had a better time than what I did.
Yeah. Oh, I was in bed before midnight. Like,
we are so rock and roll.
I know, right? Come on holiday with us, guys, because we know how to party.
To be fair, when you and I went to Amsterdam with Sophie, we did have a good time. Like we went out and we
missed the last tram home. So
missed the last tram home and had to cross a motorway holding hands, running.
Yeah, I think like we walked. It felt like we walked forever, basically, to get.
We did walk forever. That was a long time.
And then had to run across a motorway. Yeah, things happened in Amsterdam, guys. So yeah, it was a great trip, and I can't wait to go back. So, what I wanted to just briefly touch on actually before we wrap up. So we talked a little bit about at the beginning about how you're freelance and you've been freelance for the last year, which is amazing. And if you need any content or digital or social media management and creation, you should hit up Beverley, and I'll put Beverley's professional website in the show notes because she is amazing. But a lot of people I've spoken to have got jobs, so they're planning their travel around an annual leave allowance. And I know that that's how I travel too. But how does that work for you as a freelancer? Because you're not in the same position where you've got annual leave to take, because if you don't work, you don't get paid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It genuinely depends on what clients I've got at the time. So when I first went freelance, I actually started doing some work for the agency that I used to work for in London. And that was very much Monday to Friday, working remotely from my flat here in Leeds. Very much Monday to Friday. And it was like a 2-month contract. So I only really had my weekends. So I don't really think that I went away. And also because I'd just gone freelance, I was kind of like trying to hoard all the money and not spend too much. And then when that contract ended, I started being a little bit more flexible. So I started working with a few different clients, and it kind of meant that I could go away a bit more, because as long as I got the work done, it didn't really matter when I was doing it, which is the case for most freelancers, really. And a lot of us find ourselves, I think, working in the evening or maybe at weekends so that you can go out and do other things in the week. And so that's kind of why, like how I went to Berlin, because I could just go midweek. It was quite cheap to go midweek. Now I actually have a client that I work in-house for 2 days a week, and that's kind of midweek. So it's kind of meant that any travel I do has to be pushed back to the more expensive side of the week, which is obviously the weekend. But it is really nice to have that flexibility and to know that as long as I get the work done, it doesn't really matter, A, when I do it, and B, where I do it from. I mean, potentially I can go away whenever I want. It's just that I can't always go away and not have to work.
And would you combine, a lot of people that are freelance and really into travel lead a kind of slightly, they either are fully into the digital nomad lifestyle, which if it suits them, it's fine. That would stress me out too much because I like to be at home. But would you do more of a combination of kind of going away, but then also working? So maybe going away for longer, but working while you're there. Or do you like to keep things quite separate?
I like to keep things quite separate because I don't feel as though I can really give my best while I'm away. Because when I'm traveling, not that I want to completely immerse myself in a new place, but I feel like if I'm away, then I want to be away and I want to switch off. And I think especially when you run your own business and you travel as well, any time that you're not away from, that you're not in front of your computer, it needs to be quality time because, as I said, a lot of the time you're working in the evening or at the weekend. And I spend an awful lot of time in my flat working. So when I go away, I really want it to be separate, and I really want it to be a case of having some much needed time off.
I think that's very well deserved. And so it's really interesting that in many ways, the way that you plan your travel is quite similar to someone like me who plans their travel in a very similar way. My travel is very separate to my day job. And I have to plan it around my day job.
Yeah, same. I mean, if I need to work when I go away, that's completely fine. But for my social media clients, especially, you can schedule stuff for, to go out while you're away, which is what I do for them anyway. I don't put everything out live for every client because I would literally be there all day.
The secret is out.
Well, exactly. Don't tell anyone. It's not all
anyone,
live.
The secret's out.
My computer for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. God, can you imagine? I wouldn't ever sleep. No, I schedule pretty much everything for every client so that I can actually, do normal human things like eat and sleep and leave the flat sometimes. And yeah, I mean, social media is one of those great things that you can kind of set and forget to a certain extent. There is obviously community management involved. So if I've scheduled something for a client and lots of people are commenting on it, I will often just jump in on my phone and comment back, that kind of thing. With copywriting clients, obviously that's a project in and of itself, so that will get done. And I won't do that when I'm away because copywriting for me, I need to be in the game with that. I need to really, really concentrate. And it's not something I can just rattle off in half an hour to an hour when I'm, between places or chilling out at my hotel before I go for dinner or whatever. I need to really concentrate on it. So, yeah, I try and keep it separate. If I need to work when I'm away, it's totally fine. And I pretty much don't go anywhere without my laptop. But yeah, I try and make it separate because travel is so important to me in terms of getting away. And obviously it forms the majority of the content on my blog. So I don't want to spend the entire time I'm away on my laptop because I need to go out and take photos and go and eat in different places and actually experience it how in inverted commas, a normal person would experience it so that I can actually write about it when I get home.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you can't be working whilst also eating all that brunch.
Absolutely not. Can you imagine? Eggs everywhere, flat whites, be a nightmare.
I mean, yeah, you can't keep that flat white dream alive.
Exactly. And that's the dream that I'm trying to live.
Exactly. We're all trying to live that flat white dream.
Genuinely.
City breaking all over Europe. So before we wrap up, this has been amazing because I think it's been such an incredible insight to, first of all, the idea that it's never too late to travel. I think there's this real, attitude that if you haven't done your gap year, then life is over. But I think you're a great example of someone that took the leap kind of in their early to mid 20s. I certainly didn't start attacking travel with vigor until my late 20s. And I think it's never too late to kind of go and try something new and go somewhere. So I think it's really great advice that you've given on the podcast today. I would like to ask you two final questions. So it won't surprise you to know that I've talked to quite a lot of people from Leeds because apparently life is calling me to move to Leeds because all the best people live there.
All the best people live in Leeds. And I don't know why you don't live here, to be honest.
Why don't I live in Leeds? It's just ridiculous.
No idea.
The vast majority of my UK content on my blog is also in the Northwest and Northeast. So I don't know.
That says something. I think maybe you should tap into that a little bit more.
I need to lean into
the north.
I need to lean into the north and with a bit more try hard. But I've been asking everyone on the podcast to let me know what their top tip would be for a visitor to their hometown. So I've obviously talked to quite a lot of the guys from Leeds that have given me their top tip, but I'd be really interested to hear yours. So if someone was to pitch up in Leeds, what would be your one recommendation?
Oh, that's so difficult. I feel as though with Leeds, it's a funny one because when you go to places like London or Sydney, big cities around the world, it has all these sightseeing things. Like, you would never go to Sydney and like not see the Harbour Bridge. You would never go to London as a tourist and not do a few of the touristy things. With Leeds, it's one of these cities where it's much better to, I think, live here than it is to be a tourist, because it's only when you live here that you start finding out all these really cool places to go. And so I would say keep it indie. Like, Leeds has an amazing independent food scene, an independent cafe scene, which is amazing. We also have an amazing music scene. So there's always gigs going on across town, really, various venues. I think if you're going to come to Leeds, concentrate on food and go to all the independent places, because like I said, the indie food scene in Leeds is amazing. Try and catch a gig if you can. There's always local bands playing or smaller bands playing that you might not necessarily have heard of, but it's cool to just go to a venue and have a drink and watch a gig. Leeds is amazing for shopping as well, which I think Sophie said on the interview that you did with her as well. We've got amazing. We've got all the big shops as well. We've got, massive shopping centres, 2 massive shopping centres, but there's loads of really cool indie shops as well. And the arcades in the city centre, some of them are absolutely beautiful. I know that when you've come up and we've walked around, the arcades are just so lovely to look at. So even if you don't buy anything, go and have a walk through the arcades. They're lovely. I think the thing with Leeds is that it's not huge, but everyone's super friendly. And like I say, the indie scene is amazing. And that's why I love living here, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the food is unrivaled, actually. Like, or when I read kind of blogs from those people that live in Leeds, I'm like, oh my God, you have the best food. And obviously in London, we have a great food.
You have the best food.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, what I would say about that, and it's how I feel about Manchester as well, because Manchester is another place that has an incredible independent food
Manchester
scene. Yeah, but because London is so big, it's such a sprawling city, it's kind of hard to kind of keep on top of what's new and where the indie food places are, because it's so big. So when you've got a smaller city like Manchester or Leeds, you kind of just know, like, you're going to go to the Northern Quarter in Manchester, and it is wall to wall independent cafes and restaurants. And you don't come across a bloody Pizza Express in sight. Whereas even in bloody Shoreditch, you've got like a Zizzy's like popping up in there. And so it's I think because London is so big, it can be quite hard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's a really good point. Like, you walk around Leeds and there'll be new places opening up all the time. So it's quite exciting. And we have Leeds Indie Food Festival as well, which happens, I can't remember when it happens, but once a year. There's just always something going on, and there's always something to do.
I love that. So before we wrap up, I've been asking everyone on the podcast to end on this note. We talked a lot about kind of your travel experience and your top tips and your favourite destinations, but what does travel really mean to you?
I thought you might ask this, and I had no idea what I was going to say. But actually, because we've had this chat about my travels, and actually I haven't spoken to someone about all the travelling I've done for a really long time, but it's made me realise that actually for me, it makes me feel brave, which I think probably sounds a little bit cheesy, but having moved to the other side of the world with someone I'd been with for 2.5, 3 years, and then 2.5, 3 years later for that to completely be gone and to be single and kind of forced into solo travel, it kind of makes me feel brave, because that feeling that you get when you're out exploring on your own in a city that you've never been to is, I don't really think that you can describe it, which I think sounds a bit cheesy and a bit silly, but that feeling that you get when you're on the plane and you're on your own and you're landing in a city that you've never been to before, and you walk out of the airport and you're like, oh my God, I'm here and I'm alone, and you've no idea what's going to happen, but it's kind of going to be okay, pretty much. So it just makes me feel as though I'm living like a brave life, that I'm doing something that I never thought I would do, because I thought I would travel with this other person for like the rest of my life. And unfortunately that kind of didn't happen. And it makes me feel as though I'm making the most of things, really.
Oh, Beverley, that has really touched
don't
me.
Cry.
That has really touched me. And I think, you know, I'm a big proponent of travel for lots of things, you know, for your mental health. I think it's a great self-care activity. But, you know, I think you're absolutely right. I think travel, it takes you outside your comfort zone, and it does make you brave. I think if you put yourself out there, but the payoff of it is just, it's just so huge, and it is difficult to put into words. I mean, I'd been to Barcelona before, but there was a moment where I was sat in the main market at Barcelona, and I'd nearly chickened out from eating, and I'd managed to force myself up onto a bar stool. I was sat there with my beer and food, and it was such a simple thing of going to eat in the market. But for some reason, I got inside my own head and felt too scared to do it. And I sat there, and it felt so freeing. And I felt like at that moment, there was nothing that I couldn't do.
I feel exactly the same. Whenever I'm sat in a restaurant somewhere, or even just a cafe, and I'm sat on my own in, you know, a city that I've never been to before. And it's such a nice feeling to be sat there completely content with how your life is right now. Like, don't worry about what's going on at home. Don't worry about anything else. You just sat there having something to eat on your own, which can be scary, especially when you first start traveling on your own, to go and to walk into a restaurant and say table for one and sit there, you know, for an hour on your own. But actually, it's just such a nice feeling.
It's such a nice feeling. The first night that I did that, I was a little bit terrified. But I really forced myself to. I ordered my second glass. Wine helps.
Oh my God,
wine helps with this.
Definitely helps. Just get in there and order a wine, and you're fine. Yeah,
order a wine, and then I thought I could just go, and then I was like, I'm going to order a second glass of wine. This feels uncomfortable, but I'm going to sit here and have another glass of wine. And after my second glass of wine, I felt very comfortable. But you know, I think. I don't know. I think pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone in lots of different ways can be really hard, particularly as a woman. But I think travel as a woman, traveling solo, I've only done it once, so I'm definitely doing a bit of a Julia Roberts here. But it felt really transformative, and now I'm kind of a bit pissed that I have to travel with other people. Because I'm like, well, I kind of loved being on my own in Barcelona.
I love just being on my own in general, to be honest. So going away on my own to another city is kind of it's just perfect for me.
It's just the best thing ever. So this has been absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's an absolute pleasure. Where can people find you online?
So my blog is pack-your-passport.com. If you haven't started a blog yet and you haven't bought your domain yet, don't buy a domain with hyphens in, because it's really annoying when you're trying to explain it to people. Top tip. On Twitter, I am PCK Your Passport, and everywhere else, Instagram, Facebook, I am at Pack Your Passport.
Amazing. And I'll be putting links in the show notes. You've got to check out Beverley's Instagram. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I'll also put some links to some of the topics we've discussed that Beverley goes into more detail in her blog. Until then, we'll see you on the next episode. And thank you so much,
Beverley.
Sam.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of The TRAVELUST, and I hope we've managed to inspire you to think about your next trip. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you gave it a little review and rating on iTunes or your podcast player of choice, so even more people can find their inner travel lust. Until next time, have a safe journey.